There are books that leave a mark on you, and then there are books that vanish the moment you close them, like heat haze on a summer road. Regretting You by Colleen Hoover sits firmly in the second category, the literary equivalent of a sigh you're not entirely sure you ever took. This was a book club pick for us, timed with the film release later that month, which meant a night out with friends, drinks, and a lot of collective anticipation. We went in expecting something emotional, maybe even a little devastating. And what we got was fine. And fine is probably the most dangerous word you can use for a story like this. I gave Regretting You 3 stars on Fable. Not because it's badly written, it isn't that badly written, but because it lives in that frustrating middle space of being perfectly readable, lightly emotional, and almost entirely forgettable. Let's talk about why. Colleen Hoover is one of those authors who arrives with a kind of built-in reputation, a bit like Frida McFadden or Lisa Jewell. You don't just pick up her books, you enter them already expecting a reaction. Some readers are devastated by her work, others are frustrated by it, and plenty land somewhere in between, curious but cautious. Regretting You came out in 2019 during the height of Colleen Hoover's mainstream breakout. It's a dual POV story about a mother and daughter navigating grief, betrayal, and first love. All the ingredients for something deeply messy and emotionally rich. On paper, it should hurt. In practice, it barely leaves a scratch. We follow Morgan, who became a mother young and built her entire adult life around stability and restraint. Her daughter, Clara, is her opposite. She's impulsive, sharp-edged, and desperate to escape the careful life her mother has constructed around her. That tension between them is the heart of the story, or at least it should be. Then comes the inciting tragedy. Morgan's husband, Chris, dies in a car accident, but he wasn't alone. He was with Jenny, Morgan's sister and closest friend. It's the kind of reveal that should detonate a story, but instead of detonating, it sort of lands quietly, almost politely. And that's the problem. Grief here feels softened. Betrayal is acknowledged, then quickly contained. The emotional chaos that should ripple through every interaction is dulled into something manageable, safe, and strangely distant. You keep waiting for the story to lean into the mess, but it never really does. Morgan is written as the responsible one. She's controlled, she's careful, she's emotionally contained to the point of opacity. She's meant to be a woman rediscovering herself after loss, but the book never convinces you she was ever fully lost in the first place. Clara, meanwhile, is the teenage counterpoint. She's angry and restless and predictably drawn into a romance of her own. But even her storyline feels familiar, almost pre-packaged, like it's moving through a set of expected beats rather than living them. You can see every turn coming, the forbidden romance, the misunderstandings, the emotional reconciliations that arrive exactly when the structure says they should. Nothing surprises you, nothing unsettles you, and that's where Regretting You loses its grip. Hoover's writing is undeniably accessible. That's part of her appeal. The pages move quickly, the dialogue is easy, the emotional cues are clear. You don't struggle to read her books, you consume them. But ease here becomes a kind of emotional flattening. There's very little friction in the storytelling. No uncomfortable silence that lingers too long, no choices that truly fracture relationships, no emotional consequence that feels irreversible. Even the romance threads, both Morgan's and Clara's, feel strangely restrained, as if the story is constantly stepping back before anything can become too complicated. Morgan's connection with Jonah, her late sister's husband, should be a storm of grief and guilt and impossible emotion. Instead, it plays like a careful negotiation between two polite people who are in sad, similar situations that never quite collide. Clara's romance is softer still, a familiar, forbidden boy with a troubled past arc that feels more like a checklist of YA beats than a living relationship. It's not that these stories don't work at all, it's that they never quite ignite. Even the pacing contributes to this sense of emotional distance. The novel drifts in long, reflective stretches where characters think about their feelings rather than really being forced to live inside them. Moments of tension arrive, then resolve quickly, almost nervously, before they can deepen. Every time it feels like the story might get messy, it smooths itself out again. And yet, I don't think this is a bad book problem. It's a design problem. Regretting You seems built to be accessible above all else. It wants to be readable and emotional and comforting in its sadness. Grief you can sit with, but not be consumed by. And for many readers, that's exactly what they want. A story that acknowledges pain, but keeps it at a safe distance. But for me, it meant I never fully felt it. The tragedy at the centre of the book should fracture everything. Instead, it becomes something the characters orbit rather than inhabit. The emotional stakes are described more than they are experienced. And so, when I finished it, I didn't feel devastated. I didn't feel moved. I didn't feel angry. I mostly just felt done. And that to me is the most telling reaction of all. Because even a flawed book usually leaves something behind, a scene, a line, a feeling you can't quite shift. And this didn't. Days later, I struggled to recall character details without mentally flipping back through the pages. Not because I wasn't paying attention, but because nothing had anchored itself deeply enough to stay. And that's the strange thing about Regretting You. It isn't offensive, it isn't chaotic, it isn't even particularly flawed in an obvious way. It's just soft. Too soft for the kind of story it wants to be, in my opinion. There are versions of this book that could have been devastating. Generational grief explored with real emotional consequence, relationships pushed to breaking point, characters forced into decisions that leave permanent marks. Instead, we get something gentler, more polished, more controlled. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Hoover is writing emotional fiction for readers who don't want to be destroyed by it. But for me, that safety comes at a cost. Because when a story is about regret, betrayal, and grief, I want to feel the weight of it, not just observe it from a distance. So, yeah, 3 stars. Not because it failed, but because it never really risked becoming unforgettable. A book I finished, a book I understood, a book I will almost certainly never think about again. And sometimes that's the most telling kind of review there is. So until next time, my lovely dark readers, keep reading by candlelight.